Form W-7, the application for IRS individual taxpayer identification number. So this is a tax form issued by the IRS under the Department of Treasury for individuals who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents, but still need a taxpayer identification number of some form for tax purposes. So what this Form W-7, will provide is the opportunity for the IRS to evaluate your documents and then assign a taxpayer identification number for federal tax purposes only. So I guess a common question would be, why would someone want to do this? And the quick reason is that there might be tax benefits available to you if you have a taxpayer identification number that you wouldn't be able to access if you don't. And then the second part to that is that if you do want to claim these benefits, if you want to claim benefits as, for example, a U.S. resident that's in a tax treaty type situation with the country that you're from, you may need a taxpayer identification number to claim the benefits under that tax treaty. So we'll lightly kind of walk through some of the reasons why someone would complete this. We'll go over each of the reasons that you can submit the Form W-7, which are located at the very top. And then we'll talk a little bit about the information that you would put into the fields, and then we'll go over some other items that are in the form instructions. Now, all of this material we do cover in depth in our article, and I'll post a link to that article in our show notes. So at the very top, in the right-hand corner, you're going to check the application type. There are two reasons you would apply for an ITIN. Either you're applying for a new one, or you're renewing an existing one. So pick the appropriate one based on whether or not you have an ITIN that you need to renew for tax purposes, or if you're submitting a new application. Now, if you're renewing one, then you need to make sure you complete lines 6E and 6F, which specifically ask you if you've received an ITIN and then ask you to list your ITIN. So we'll cover that in a little bit more depth. We'll only go through one scenario with our hero, John Doe, who's filing a Form W-7 because his turns out that his wife is a U.S. citizen, right? So he checked box E, and then he listed his wife's name, Jane Doe, and then here's her social security number. However, there are other reasons you might file this form. Let's start with the reason of box A. So box A basically indicates that you are a non-resident alien and you might need an ITIN to claim a tax treaty benefit between the United States and the country. So, and then there are exceptions listed in both the form instructions and in our article. So the exceptions basically mean that when you file a tax return, or when you file Form W-7, you need, if you check most of these boxes, you need to file a U.S. tax return with your Form W-7 unless you meet an exception. So for box A, you can meet exception 1, which is passive income, in which case you would actually need to list. So if you select box A and you have an exception, you would list your exception here under other, and then you would say something like exception 1A, partnership income, right? So in this case, you're listing an exception stating that you have partnership income that receives a different tax treatment because of a tax treaty. So There's also exception 2, which would apply, which is other income. So if you're claiming benefits from other sources of income or from a U.S. income tax treaty, and you receive wages, salary, compensation, gambling income, scholarships, things of that nature. The passive, any type of income that's not passive income, it's other income. So you would list one of those 2 exceptions. For box B, it's a non-resident alien filing a U.S. Tax return, so you need to file this form with your tax return. This can apply to either a non-resident alien who must file a tax return in the United States to report income that's either effectively or not effectively connected to a trade or business in the United States, or you're filing a U.S. federal tax return only for the purpose of obtaining a refund. So you would select box B. For reason C, you're a resident alien based on days present in the United States filing a U.S. federal tax return. This also is known as the substantial presence test, and it's a combination of you have to have had at least 31 days in the current year or the most previous tax year. And you have to have 181 days in the United States between the most recent tax year and the 2 just before that. And there's a calculation where you have to count 1/3 of the prior year days presence in the United States, and then 1/6 of the days present previously. So we go into a little bit more detail about the substantial presence test in our article in case it's hard to understand in this. That's what you would use selection C for. So in box D, that's if you're a dependent or if you're filing this on behalf of a dependent, then not only would you put this information here, you would also enter the relationship to the U.S. citizen. So a dependent is never a spouse, which is why D and E are in 2 separate areas, but you would indicate like son, right? So this is someone who can be claimed on a tax return in the United States, but is not eligible to get a Social Security number. So there's certain criteria that apply to dependents of U.S. military personnel. So if you can submit original documents, certified copies, or notarized copies of identification documents for military personnel. You have to include a copy of the service member's military ID, or the person must be applying from an overseas APO, FPO address, which is a United States address for military personnel serving overseas. So we've covered E. In section F, or reason F, if you're a non-resident alien student, professor, or researcher, and you're claiming an exception or filing a tax return, even though you haven't really abandoned your bona fide residence in another country, you would use this. And then G would be if you're the dependent or a spouse of a non-resident alien that's holding a U.S. visa, you would use category G. And then other reasons, for example, sometimes third parties like banks and financial institutions may require you to submit a form W-7 so that you can have a taxpayer identification number, and then they can issue an informational return. This happens a lot with mortgages. That would be exception 3, mortgage interest. Sometimes disposition of U.S. real property. So if you sold a house or if you disposed of a house, then you would need to file IRS form 8288. You would also need a taxpayer ID number for that. But you don't have to file a tax return with those exceptions. And then finally, there's a fifth exception known as the Treasury Decision 9363 that applies to large foreign corporations. So we'll go into detail on that simply because most people completing this form probably will not need to use exception 5. So now that we're in the taxpayer information fields, we're going to list your name, first name, middle name, and last name 2 different times. In line 1A, this is going to be the name as it appears on your current identity documents that you'll be submitting. And then on line 1B will be your name if it's different that was given to you at birth and as it appears on your birth certificate. So 2 different distinctions possibly depending on your circumstances. In line 2, you'll enter your address with your with your street address, apartment number. In this case, our hero John Doe, he was born John Quincy Adams, and he lives in a fictional town called Anytown, Texas, and his foreign address is a fictional town in Barcelona, Spain. So we've put both addresses there. And John Doe was fictionally born in Spain. So I listed the date of birth. It's important for a lot of people to understand how the United States Internal Revenue Service will process date conventions. We'll use the month, date, year convention as opposed to in Europe where we use day, month, year. So this 01/11/1995 actually is January 11th, 1995, not November 1st. So that's an important distinction. I'll be sure to point that out in every step of this video, just briefly, just as a gentle reminder. So the country of birth, check male or female, city and state or province, which are optional. Other information. So the form instructions in the article do specify that based upon certain criteria here, if you check one box, then you need to complete certain fields. So I went ahead and just entered all the ones that applied to John Doe's situation, but I'll go through all of them in depth. Just know that in the article, you'll see a specific reference to certain lines that you have to complete based on the reason box that you select up here. So in line 6A, country or countries of citizenship. So if John were a citizen of Spain and France, then you would write Spain and France. However, you would only list this information for the first country, and then you would have to attach an additional sheet of paper that has the exact same information for the second or subsequent countries. So in line 6B, we're entering a fictional foreign tax ID number. This should be whatever your tax ID number is. In the United States, that's synonymous with a social security number. I believe that's the case in some countries, but not necessarily all. If you have a U.S. visa of any type, you would enter the type, the visa number, and then the date of expiration. In this situation, John Doe doesn't have a visa because he is the spouse of an alien. So his wife has a visa, but he doesn't. But you would, in 6D, indicate the type of identity document that you're submitting. In this case, he's made it easy. A passport. When it comes to identity documents, you need to have one document at least that satisfies the identity portion of that, like a picture ID that verifies that you look like the person that's listed on that document. And then you also need to provide a document that states your tie with that foreign country, particularly if the United States has a treaty with that country and you're trying to obtain tax benefits. Part of this process involves the United States verifying that if you say you're from Spain and you're claiming Spanish tax treaty benefits, then you would have to have your identity verified uh, that you are who you say you are and you actually are from Spain. So, um, and the IRS actually keeps track of lots of scams committed by people involving tax treaties from countries by filing misleading information. So, um, but when it comes to this, a passport is the only form of documentation, and there are 13 acceptable types of documentation listed in the instructions that the IRS will accept. The passport is the only one that meets both criteria on its own. So, in other words, if you submitted a Spanish passport, the IRS would accept that without any additional documentation. You don't need a driver's license and then something else. You would just need to submit the passport. Of course, you're going to have to do without your passport for the period of time that it would take for the IRS to process it. Generally, 60 days is what the IRS requests when it comes to time to turn around the processing of any documents. So the IRS does commit to returning your documents, the original documents. They don't keep any of them, but it might take up to 60 days to get your passport back. So in this case, we entered that this passport was issued by Spain. We entered the passport number, the expiration date. And the United States is no longer accepting a passport by itself if there is not a date of entry into the United States stamped into it. So if there's not an entry stamp, then it's not being accepted. In line 6E, have you received an ITIN or an IRS number? IRSN. So an IRS number is a number that someone might be assigned if they file a tax return and they don't enter either a social security number or an ITIN. You would get an IRSN, and any correspondence that relates to that specific tax return would contain your IRSN on it. If you have an IRSN and you later obtain an ITIN or a social security number, there's no relationship. As most people know, you should safeguard your ITIN or your social security number, but realistically, an IRS number is not as pertinent to someone's identity. So for this instance, we put no, but if you did have a previous one, you would enter it and then the name that it was issued under. And then line 6G, if you are obtaining a taxpayer ID number for purposes of research or education or teaching, you would enter the name of, or a work visa, then you would enter the name of the institution or the company, the city and state, and your estimated length of stay. So, and then below that, you would sign and date this, again, month, day, and year format. If you are applying on behalf of someone, most likely a minor who might not be able to sign by themselves, you would put your name as a delegate here and then indicate your relationship. You could be a parent, you could be a court-appointed guardian. If you are neither, then you would need to have a power of attorney. For minors, you would need to have a power of attorney signed by the parent or the court-appointed guardian. You can also use IRS Form 2848, which is the IRS Power of Attorney form, which must specifically state that you are authorized to file Form W-7 on their behalf. If it's an adult person, then you need to have a power of attorney assigned by them if you're the delegate or a court-appointed guardian. If the acceptance agent would enter their information here. So basically, an acceptance agent is how you are able to submit your application. You can apply for your ITIN by visiting an IRS Taxpayer Assistance Center. You can send it by mail or by a private delivery service to their P.O. box in Austin, Texas, or you can apply through an acceptance agent. So there are two types. There's an acceptance agent and a certifying acceptance agent. And so a certifying acceptance agent can verify original documents and certified copies. For dependents, a certifying acceptance agent can only verify passports and birth certificates, and they can return that document immediately after reviewing it. So if you're living outside the United States, you can apply for an ITIN through a certifying acceptance agent. And again, the form instructions state you should allow about 7 weeks for the IRS to notify you of your status, probably closer to about 3 months if you're applying during tax season, so between January 15th and April 30th, or if you're filing from an overseas location. So that your acceptance agents would use this box, and it looks a lot similar to what a tax professional would use. So that's all we have for this form. It's one page. It's pretty simple. I'm going to talk about some of the benefits, the tax benefits that that either you might be eligible for with an ITIN, and certain ones that are not allowed even if you have one. So you have to have an ITIN if you're listed on a tax return for a specific tax benefit as a dependent. So things like being able to file a joint return and get preferential tax treatment that way. Claiming head of household, which gives a little bit of a better tax treatment than being a single taxpayer or single filer. Tax credits such as the American Opportunity Tax Credit, the Premium Tax Credit, the Child and Dependent Care Credit, or the Credit for Other Dependents. Those are all ones that depend on having a ITIN. However, an ITIN can't guarantee all credits. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, you can't claim it if you have an ITIN, and you can't claim it on behalf of a child unless that person has a Social Security number. They cannot have an ITIN if you want to claim the Earned Income Credit. If you have an ITIN as a child, you can't be a qualifying child for the Child Tax Credit, the Additional Child Tax Credit. So, and if you're eligible for a Social Security card, then you should not be completing Form W-7 at all. You should be completing Form SS-5, which is a Social Security form. You file that with the Social Security Administration to receive a Social Security number and a Social Security card. That allows you a lot more privilege and benefits in terms of tax benefits, but you also get recognized. Your earnings will start accumulating for Social Security tax retirement benefits. So we do cover all of these topics in a little bit more in detail in our article. Simply go to our website, teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in Form W-7, and you should see our article up here. We'll also put a link to the article in our show notes, and we'll put links to other forms that were either mentioned in the video or that relate to topics that we had in the article and mentioned in the video. So if you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter on our website. And if you like our YouTube video tutorials, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions, if there's a form or a tax topic you want me to cover, please post it in the show notes or the comments section. Thank you very much and have a great day.